Welcome back to our webinars, everybody. And real quick, if you find value from these webinars that Lynn and I do, please share them with your friends. We enjoy offering them for free. And the point is to reach audiences that appreciate what we're doing here. And Lynn and I thought this month we would talk about the big topic of pain. And I'm particularly interested in this topic because of the role that exercise can play in creating pain, in diagnosing pain, and also in sometimes helping treat and mitigate pain. So it's a very nuanced topic, and it's one I bump into a lot. As we roll through the slides and get started, Lynn, is there any initial remark you want to say in terms of what drew us to this topic?
Well, one thing is that it's a very common issue. The Animal Health Trust that has done a lot of research on this, and one of their studies found that nearly half the sport horse population in normal work may be lame, but the lameness is not recognized by owners or trainers. And I think this ties in with what you're going to talk about, Jack, that the ways that horses are trained and ridden often create the pain, but it's so common that people don't even see what's going on.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. Part of it's training our eye. Part of what I'm hoping people can take away from this conversation is maybe just hitting pause and spending time with your own thoughts in terms of your own relationship with pain, because I wanted to start out here with, is it realistic to believe our horses can be 100% pain-free? This might be controversial, but I don't know that they can be, where they're living animals. They're probably always bumping into things and getting small bruises and having perhaps digestive feelings with the changes of seasons and forages. And, so I think sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to think that horses can be entirely pain-free in the same way that I don't know many people that are 100% pain-free. However, it is a nuanced topic. It is not black and white. And I'm hoping that that's part of what we can help people navigate in this brief little webinar. So let's go to the next slide, Lynn. And I think and you touched on this, but part of what makes physical pain in horses tricky to navigate is sometimes we tend to conflate pain and dysfunction. I believe that horses can have dysfunctional movement and it doesn't always involve pain. Sometimes it does. Now, sometimes dysfunctional movement, so quickly, I'll just define that as a horse that doesn't have very good balance. It sort of travels around like a bag of marbles, spilling all over the place, or they're really heavy with their locomotion, jarring on the joints, crooked, these kinds of things, hollow in the top line. A lot of times dysfunctional movement can cause pain, can get a horse stuck in a pain cycle. And it's hard to pull these two apart because it's like, well, is the pain causing the horse to move in a crummy manner, or is the riding and training creating more dysfunction that makes the horse sore? And this photo for me illustrates dysfunctional movement. I know some people would disagree with me. This is from my book, Equine Fitness. It shows a horse moving in a very flashy manner, very exaggerated forelimb movement, but you can see the trailing hindquarters, the hind legs taking a short stabby step, not in balance and harmony with the front end, which indicates quite a bit of strain in the lower back and an extension of the sacroiliac region. So a very taxing, dysfunctional way for this horse to move. And I'd probably guess that this horse eventually, if it not already, it does have some pain in the lower ligaments and maybe hoofs and maybe more than that. So anyway, getting clear yourself that there can be a difference between dysfunction and pain. A lot of times there is an interrelationship, but I think this is really something to work through with trainers and vets in a team fashion. Let's move on to the next slide, and then I'll just give a personal anecdote on why and how I bump into this topic almost on a weekly basis. Is I see, nowadays there is, gratefully, the acknowledgement the horses are not machines, they're not robots. I see a shift in our thinking, and I love that. But as I said, I think sometimes if and when people identify some discomfort in the horse, there can be steps taken to assume that we need to full stop on everything. Let's just get the pain under control. Now, pain can come in all kinds of ways and severities, and we're going to discuss that. And pain can be acute versus chronic. Sometimes they bleed into each other. So, as I said, it's not as clear as the horse is in pain or it's not in pain. It can be a spectrum. And the reason that for me, just hitting pause on any kind of exercise and trying to just get the pain under control. The reason that doesn't always work is I'll just use a personal example from this week to illustrate this is I had a person reach out for a custom fitness plan for the horse. And she knew the horse had a weak stifles, a really unstable hind end. So this particular horse, and it's not uncommon, I see this quite a bit, but when she would go to trot on, especially on a curved line, her hind leg would kind of buckle. And then she would not want to continue trotting. She'd want to come back to a walk. And it was a pretty clear case of locking stifles, and the mare is very out of shape because it's hard to get the horse conditioned when they have this dysfunction in the hind end. So it's almost like this cycle, right? The way to fix these locking stifles and the hind quarter buckling and kind of falling apart and having the horse not seem like it's a good idea to ride it, the way through that is to improve its fitness. But the owner is kind of at an impasse because she can't parse through how much of what she's seeing with the horse is uncomfortable and painful for the horse versus how much of it is maybe not painful, but it's just really loose, sloppy ligaments and zero muscle tone and dysfunctional movement. And, the answer is probably it's a little bit of both. But I know through helping a lot of horses with this particular problem that the way forward is to improve the fitness. So, exercise in this case is going to help any potential discomfort go away. That said, we have to work within the boundaries of what the horse is showing us she can do. So, avoiding curved lines, avoiding the canter if she's giving us clear reasons to, and we'll get to some of those signs in the future. But this is just one of the ways I bump up against this because the inclination in these cases sometimes is to say, well, the horse is buckling in the hind end. I'm nervous to trot it. I think maybe that's uncomfortable for her. Let me just do, a lot of body work and give her time off, and maybe the discomfort will go away. But in this case, exercise needs to be part of the equation, the right exercise, I should say. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. And I want to just hit pause and acknowledge, and sometimes this involves some humble pie, but even with the right, the best treatment, vet treatment and pain treatment and exercise programs, a lot of times the dysfunction and pain that we see, it does come from how we keep horses, lack of free range, pastures and stressful environments, not enough socialization. So again, this topic of if you've identified some pain signals in your horse and you want to address them, it can be a little bit getting into the weeds if you're throwing everything at the horse in terms of treating it, but it lives in a less than ideal boarding arrangement. And Lynn, you might touch on this again a bit, but particularly what I see a lot that does cause pain and dysfunction is horses that just are really grappling with a lot of stiffness and restricted, limited range of motion. Horses that have soreness or poor gaits through lack of circulation, poor hoof quality from not enough daily movement. And then, a big one is obesity. We're keeping our horses unfortunately chunkier and chunkier, and that creates its own cascade of discomfort and dysfunctional movement. So the methods in which we're domesticating our horses are part of this discomfort equation, and I can't underscore that enough. So then let's get back to movement. Let's go to the next slide, Lynn. In in my world, as I already touched on with the personal example I just gave from this week, but I really strongly believe that poor biomechanics or way of going, however you want to talk about it, the horse's quality of gaits really has to be addressed because like this horse shows us here in this picture, these are really poor biomechanics. It's a, head high, a low trunk, a hollow back, hind legs are trailing. There's a lot of concussion on the forelimbs, a lot of compression of the spinal joints. Is a dysfunctional way of movement. If this horse were to carry a rider, especially a heavier rider, you're going to create quite a bit of pain, possibly injury. In my world, the answer isn't to, well, let's avoid exercising the horse. It's about finding the right exercises. It might be a lot of groundwork. It might be a different kind of riding than you originally pictured. But again, in my world, especially horses that have sore backs or they have a lameness that presents itself because a horse has been quite crooked or shoulder dominant for a long time, just trying to resolve the discomforts that might be cropping up from those situations. They don't go away without instilling the correct balance and body mechanics. And again, it might be controversial, but I don't know about you, Lynn. I almost never see horses that just like live out in pasture and don't receive any exercise as looking entirely pain-free and moving wonderfully in my world. I strongly believe that correct gymnastic exercise in a variety of forms. It can be entirely ground-based, it can be at liberty, but I believe horses benefit from good movement. I do not believe that horses in today's world are better off if we just kind of let them hang out in the pasture like pasture ornaments, because I see plenty of horses who do live out in the wild, so to speak, that are their gaits don't look very fluid and comfy when they giddy up across the field. And then
I
last, oh, go on, Lynn.
Well, I think a point there is that horses who truly live in the wild, free roaming herds, who have to travel to find their own forage, water, shelter. What are the statistics? They move 10, 15 miles a day,
Yeah.
mostly at a walk, but they're moving a lot. How many of our horses? I've got 5 acres of pasture when I can open them all up. And my horses certainly aren't going to be moving anything like 10 miles a day. They mosey and they nibble and they mosey and they nibble. They don't have to go very far to get the next blade of grass. And so even when we have nice turnout, I don't think it gets the horses anywhere near the amount of movement that they would in a free roaming herd when they're living a natural lifestyle.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a really good point. So let's move on to my next slide, and then we'll hand things over to what you're going to cover. And again, this is a case where, at least as a trainer, it does involve for me a lot of being humble in the moment and adjusting exercise versus abandoning it if and when you do observe signs of pain, which we're going to spell out a little bit more clearly here in a second. So again, this is why I underscored in the beginning, kind of assessing your own relationship with pain and how you observe it and navigate it with your horse, because there are going to be times a horse, even in a good program, they get a hoof abscess or they have a reaction to a vaccine or et cetera, et cetera. There are moments a horse is going to be in a little bit of discomfort, and it's up to us to pivot and not abandon activity, but to take a very, very creative and open-minded approach, and get outside our box and what kinds of movement can really benefit and help the problem. And definitely confer with your vet. This might not be information that they offer right off the bat. They may not be trained in it, but they also may not know that something you and your team are open to. But when I've brought it up previously and said, well, how about, these corrective exercises or whatnot, would those be appropriate to do? And they say, oh, heck yeah, but they didn't offer it right off the bat. But I encourage you to explore that, rather than just, as I said, trying to treat the pain and hope that everything ends up the way you want it at the end of the day. But now let's move on and talk a little bit more concretely about reading pain. I'm going to hand the reins over to Lynn now.
People who've been with us before, especially in programs where we've talked about emotions, may recognize this diagram. It relates to emotions. Emotions are a biological fact. It's been well demonstrated that horses and humans and all other mammals share the same 7 core emotions. And the negative emotions are fear, rage, which is aggression, and panic and grief. One might think that pain would be a negative emotion. Biologically, it's not, but pain is very related to negative emotions. Like negative emotions, it signals a threat and it creates negative brain chemicals and hormones. And it actually in the brain is very, very close to the emotions of panic and grief. But if we look at what happens with pain, sudden pain is more likely to trigger fear. And I saw this in our Brandy when she first came. She apparently had what people describe as shooting pains. And she would be walking along acting like everything was fine, and in a flash would be in a state of absolute terror. Um, but chronic pain creates stress. And then stress adjusts our perception of things. So stress makes pain, the perception of pain, stronger. So stress and pain sort of have a negative feedback loop going on there. And pain can also trigger aggression. If a horse is aggressive, the first thing to look for is pain, especially if that horse has not been aggressive in the past. If he suddenly becomes aggressive, that's red flag. I'd be calling my vet right away. And as we've mentioned in previous programs on emotions, when a horse spends too much time in this stress zone of negative emotions and pain, it takes a toll on his health, on his behavior, and of course on his training and ability to move. These are some of the red flags of behavior for pain: avoidance or resistance. The first picture is Braun saying, it is too hot today. I don't want to go into the arena and do groundwork. He was absolutely adamant. So I took advantage of the opportunity to get a picture and then took him back to the shady shed. And compensatory behaviors are another biggie. And Shiloh is showing one of those in the second photo where she's cantering on the wrong lead. That's always a red flag for something's wrong. If not pain, then presumably some poor balance. And the other signs of pain include things that people sometimes look at as behavior or training issues, like the tension, posture, anxiety, depression. Now, aggression, I talked about, that's always a red flag for pain. And one that I've never seen anybody else talk about, and that is, although horses hide pain instinctively because they're prey animals, when they trust us, they may try to tell us they're in pain and solicit attention. I actually had Bronze walk up to me one time and I could already see he was limping, but as he walked up to me, he stopped in front of me and held up his right front hoof, like, this is the one that hurts, Lynn, I need help. And it's not always that obvious. Horses may come over, get closer, nudge, even grab your clothing, like, don't leave me. Any sort of soliciting behavior that is new to that horse may signify that he's asking for help. And I think the more that people tune into their relationships with their horses, and I see people doing that more and more, the more horses will overtly show that they need help. The more we listen, the more the horse goes, yeah, I've I told her I'm having a problem. She listened. She did something about it. The more likely that horse is to say, hey, I'm trying to tell you I'm in pain here. And I see people on the internet saying, I've got this behavior problem with my horse and pain's been ruled out. That's simply impossible for
Mm.
a lot of reasons. Aside from hiding and compensating, the site of the pain is not always the location of the cause. And I'm sure you see this all the time, Jack, that until the horse compensates for whatever the immediate issue is, some other body part's hurting. So you might address that without having gotten to the source of the pain. It can also be intermittent. Maybe the day the vet comes and checks the horse, that's not a painful day. Fear can get the adrenaline going that overrides pain. And typically pain related behaviors have been very much misinterpreted. So a lot more research focus is going into the pain, and the horse grimace scale was devised from a study of horses who had were undergoing castration. So they had a big population of horses to observe the pain as they recovered. And this is a standardized scoring system starting from 0 of no pain to 2, which is serious pain, and 1 being in between. And it's based on specific facial expressions. It's a little complicated. It requires the scoring, and it requires some careful observation. Uh, the website that I gave below here has detailed photographic charts showing this is 0 pain, this is 1, this is a 2 for each of the different body parts that they're talking about. So for somebody who wants to delve into this or get very specific visual feedback for that, this website's got that there. But because this is a little complex, the Equine Pain Face program was designed to make it easier to apply this. And this looks at 5 key areas: the ears, eyes, nose, muzzle, and facial muscles. And I think for those of us who are tuned into our horses, I think most people already intuitively are watching these things. We may not be able to define, oh, my horse is in pain because I'm seeing this or that about his eyes or ears. But I think people who are tuned in notice these things. But this program has a poster, free poster that's available you can download from that website. And Jack, you were going to talk a little bit about the facial expressions, I think, relative to some of this. So I think if we look at this horse, I think all of us would intuitively say that's not a happy horse.
Yeah, and certainly it could be worse, you know. Some people might look at this photo and think, well, that horse looks kind of serene. But the reason that this is interesting to me is I travel around the country a lot and give clinics, and the first thing I typically see is the horse's face when they come into the arena and when we start riding, doing exercises together, the horse and rider and myself. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert on it. I'm not, but it's a helpful tool for me to observe the horse as we go through exercises. Some horses, when they enter the arena, you can tell, oh man, this horse is really uncomfortable. It might be an older horse. He might be dealing with some aches and pains or something else. Um, and what's cool about horses is most of them are so in the moment and so open that as you start to work through exercises, if and when their body does start to feel more comfy in different settings and balances, you can read that and see that. And the rider may not always notice, but we try to make the rider notice because we're trying to make the horse more comfy, right? That's the goal. But yeah, certainly this horse gives me an indication like there's a lot of tension here. It looks like a very obedient horse, but I'm seeing the tight chin, jaw, obviously a super tight noseband too, but ears looking kind of stiff, a little bit of
Mhm.
orbital tightening. I think our next photo may have even more explicit. Yeah, so we've got like an open mouth here, um, orbital tightening on this horse. To me, looks like quite strained facial muscles. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. And again, it's not, this isn't the reason the Grimace scale and these pain posters are so helpful, I think, is not to be like Debbie Downer on the sidelines and, judge your friends by how their horses look. To me, especially if you have a horse, maybe it's an older horse that they maybe you're dealing with some chronic pain that waxes and wanes and it's intermittent, as you touched on before, Lynn. These can become really helpful because on any given day, the horse could feel different. And maybe there's days where you observe, like, gosh, my horse seems pretty comfy today. Or as an instructor, I can say, hey, today is a day we can maybe do a little bit more or do your activities that you typically like to do, but we know make, so and so sore on days he's telling us that. So I think that's where it can be just become really useful, as you mentioned, Lynn, part of the relationship. Yeah. Oh, this is the cover of Gerd Heuschmann's book.
Yes, it is. I knew you'd
Legendary
like that.
text. Yeah, there's so much wrong with this poor guy. Just a really tight, worried eye. The ears are stiff. The jaw is straining. The lips are open. I mean, just everything
And
here.
the muscle at the top of the neck and everything. It's like, where do we even start? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so and so far we've only talked about faces.
Mm.
Now the ridden horse pain ethogram includes the whole body. And they've cataloged for this one 24 specific behaviors that relate to lameness. With the what they've come up with is that if a horse shows 8 or more of those behaviors, he's likely having some pain. So no one or two of those behaviors says, oh, that horse is in pain, but 8 or more, yes. And again, the prevalence of this issue, what we have here is 73% of the horses in this study that were assumed to be sound by owners showed lameness. And again, it shows how widely accepted the behaviors are that are in fact showing pain. This link gives us charts, videos, explanations. This is actually the website for this for the ridden horse pain ethogram and has loads of information
It's
there.
super, yeah, it's super great. If anybody hasn't heard of this, I know it's pretty widely distributed, but the other cool thing about this is Dr. Sue Dyson, who's behind it, she makes a very, very valid case on, before you determine on any given day if a horse is lame or sore, there's value in kind of warming it and moving it because of it. Oftentimes their movement does change for better or for worse. I know a lot of lameness exams happen with the horse like stone cold out of the stall, and I always thought that was kind of weird, but
Mhm.
the other thing is, it's probably your horse is going to show one or two of these signs on this ethogram, but it's helpful to know that, you start getting more, or maybe you're gaining signs as a horse is in the training program. Then you start to have red flags, but it takes a very realistic approach, I think. As I said, because can a horse be 100% pain free? I mean, that's the goal, but there might be one or two signs you're seeing, but gosh, we hope there's not, a ton. So it is a very helpful exercise to work through, I think.
I think we can train our eyes to see these things. And also as riders, it pays to train ourselves to feel them, to feel the difference. It's one of the values of riding a lot of different horses. Um, I have often felt a horse being footsore, for example, when he's not showing any overt sign of lameness, but I can just feel it in the way he moves. And I think the more we tune into those things, the quicker we can spot something and head off bigger issues. And here's another one that probably shows a number of those signs that we could be in trouble.
Yeah, real tight nostrils, the intense stare with the eyes. I think judging from the photo, a really stiffly held tail. Maybe even a ringing tail. If this was a video, we'd be able to check through more of those
Mhm.
24 behaviors.
Right. The dog people will talk about a concept called the gift of growl, and it means don't teach dogs not to growl. Be glad that a dog growls before he bites. And I think we might look at any negative behavior, what people like to call bad behavior among horses. I think we could look at that as like our gift or our horse's gift to us because the behavior is telling us there's a problem. And if we could take the perspective of, let's be grateful that your horse is showing you there's an issue, um, and that it's time to consider what we might do about it. And pain and anxiety can be really hard to tell apart. So there's a lot of times where you have to trust your empathy when you're thinking, gosh, he's really worried in this situation, or he just doesn't really look comfortable. And when in doubt, trust your intuition. There was a study that showed that empathetic owners actually are quicker to interpret a horse's behavior, better at interpreting horses' behavior than many professionals are. So don't discount your own perceptions of these things. And if we have a couple minutes, Jack, I have
Yes,
a story. Unless, do you have more you wanted to say first?
we have no, we have 8 minutes, so please go on.
This is Brandy, who's our poster girl for pain and exercise that helps pain. This was Brandy at age 7. You can see the dropped back, the high head, um, the goat on a rock posture. Her movement was her trot was a frantic half a zoomy trot, and she couldn't canter. She Her gallop was a mad scramble that was usually disunited, um, and yet 3 vets checked her and could not find pain. So we got a sports medicine specialist and a chiropractor who teamed up together to look at her with X-rays of her back, showing that at age 7 she had premature arthritis in her spine. Which we suspect came from having been ridden by a very large person in a very large, ill-fitting saddle. But of course, it could have been lots of other causes. But the really instructive thing that I got from this, aside from the fact that we could not ride her and cannot drive her because she cannot tolerate anything strapped around her, even a surcingle around her middle. But what we discovered, because the vet and the chiropractor were willing to take so much time, they lunged her a little bit and found that even after some gentle, careful lunging, her back was less painful than it was when they first examined her. And since then, and I wish I had an after picture, I'll try and have one for the next time we do this sort of topic. Now, Brandy's back is in much healthier shape. In fact, the chiropractor was just here yesterday and said her back's in great shape. There's no pain in her back. And her back is now she's 18. Her back still, it doesn't look wonderful, but she is able to move comfortably. She has a lovely trot. She can canter on both leads, balanced and comfortably. And all of that came from being very judicious about the kind of exercise that I asked of her.
That's perfect. I love that story because it does underscore the just kind of letting her sit and maybe giving her injections wasn't necessarily going to help her achieve more efficient movement. Muscle activation is so critical. Anybody who themselves has been an athlete understands the world of difference or the anguish that can come from poor muscle activation, good muscle activation, faulty muscle activation. And in the case of her, in the case of this horse, yeah, developing some activity in the long back muscles can help ease I mean, I don't know if there was spinal compression involved with the arthritis, but just that condition
I think
of
so.
ouchy joints. Yeah.
Yes, and but I was very, very careful about the quality of exercise and the quality of movement I asked of her. So I was very careful to use exercises and ways of working with her that encourage her to carry her body correctly, not just moving forward, but moving forward in a way that was positive for her body.
And again, because if you hadn't, then if she's moving, but it's dysfunctional movement, then you're just on this cycle. And, to close up, I think a lot of people can get stuck on the cycle saying, well, my horse is in pain, so therefore I shouldn't exercise them. But exercise, as we've covered before in various webinars, it can take all forms. And sometimes what we deem valuable, what based on our background and our discipline, may not in that moment be valuable for the horse, but some type of movement oft almost always is valuable for these horses in terms of improving circulation and when we're talking about soft tissue discomfort, but even joint pain, a little bit of movement is better than standing around, especially on hard ground in a stall. Uh, so yeah, I think that's where I want to close up. We've got a couple minutes left. If there's anything that you wanted to add, Lynn.
No, I think you've made some really good points, Jack. And if we can pay attention and find ways to help the horses move comfortably, I've noticed that even that vets even now are less likely to recommend stall rest and more likely to recommend at least small paddock turnout so there's some movement going on.
Yes. And, take the time, check out at least one of the pain signs that we brought up today. There's even more than that. There's a pain scale for laminitis. I think it's called the Obel scale or something like that. But it's worth checking this out because sometimes, for example, taking a horse from a trot to a canter under saddle. Sometimes a horse will like fling its head around. That's on the pain ethogram. And there's just no denying it. I mean, a horse doesn't just flail around when it's moving from one gate to the other. Assuming it's not really fresh and a big gust of wind just, blew up its bum or something. But if you're repeatedly getting something like that, it's on the pain ethogram. And I was a skeptic initially when I saw the pain ethogram, but then I started like exploring some of these behaviors and changing up how I was approaching things. And don't, whoa, lo and behold, these behaviors go away. The horse isn't shaking its head around going into the canter, or, I'm just using that example because it's a simple one, or being cinchy, putting the girth on, so they become hard to deny after you work through them. But it's part of having a relationship with a horse. Don't beat yourself up. It's just knowledge, I think. So yeah, this was fun to talk through with you, Lynn. All right, we'll end it right there.